r/ask Reddit. What's something you saw as a kid that looked harmless but if you witnessed it now it would horrify you? Until the age of 12 my grandma had custody of me. I used to sleep with her and she slept with a baseball bat next to her bed. It wasn't until I was much older that I realized she did it. Dad's friends wouldn't be able to do anything to me. Dad was a drug addict and drunk, and when he was out of prison he had all kinds of people in and out of the house. You would never know what would be missing the next day, often my Nintendo. She did everything she could to protect me from God knows who what, and I had zero clue. Your grandma is a hero. When I was about 4 years old I grabbed an Australian brown snake and swung it around like a lasso. The second most venomous land snake. A bite from one of these is a certain death sentence for a child. True Australian. My town swim instructor would always make fun of the boys, anywhere from ages 6-13 or so, for wanting to change in the stalls, and not out in the main changing room area where he was with his clipboard. He was eventually arrested when a computer tech found child porn on his laptop when he took it in for some repairs. And thanks to the trial we learned that he was filming us with a little camera attached to his clipboard. Also, that he had been molesting a disabled boy that was in his care. What the duck? When I was in 6th grade a girl showed up to school with a Tinkerbell tattoo on her hip. In our child brains, we found this very mature and grown up that her parents had let a family member tattoo her. Looking back at it now, it's concerning that anyone would sign off on a tattoo for a 10-11-year-old. Same thing happened at my school. In 6th grade a girl came to school and while changing for gym she showed off a big tattoo that said daddy's little girl on her barely developed breast. She turned out okay, but you can still see the tattoo in pictures she posts on Facebook and I cringe just thinking about it. A male classmate of mine, age 10, bragged about having sex. He seemed to enjoy it. Now I realize he was probably being abused, but back then I just thought he was bragging. My parents told me about me getting drunk at 2 years old when they left a glass of whiskey unattended. I was bumping into walls and falling down. The next day I was extremely pale and sickly looking. My grandmother was begging them to take me to a hospital, but they didn't because they didn't want to get in trouble. I'd always thought of that as a funny story until I told it to a coworker and she looked horrified and concerned. My grandma would save time by blow drying my hair when I was still in the bath. It was when my nanny and I role-played to be in a relationship, an abusive relationship mind you. I was 8 at the time. She'd kiss me on the lips and I'd sit on her lap, and it's really creeping me out now that I think about it. I also got molested by my babysitter and didn't realize that that was what it was until I was a legal adult. That's some unresolved trauma that I don't wanna deal with. In preschool my classmate choked to death on a cheese stick. Watching my kindergarten teacher die of cancer. He just kept getting skinnier and paler and more exhausted, and eventually he just didn't show up anymore, and that was that. Didn't understand it then obviously. Holy shit, that's so sad and horrifying. Those ducking fuzzy caterpillars that look all fluffy. Later as an adult I learned of their painfully menacing ways. I remember my elementary school was infested with fluffy caterpillars. I never really considered it, but the sidewalks used to literally be covered in blood from people walking on them. They were everywhere and the teachers never even talked to us about them unless it was to tell us to put them down. I'm remembering that we had a really bad tentworm infestation the one year. It was bad enough that there was a freaking train trail of them on the edges of our high school roof, just slowly crawling along it. That was one really interesting thing to see so many in one place. My mom holding what I thought to be sugar cubes and was mad because she didn't give me any after returning to the car with them at an unknown sketchy trailer where she left me in the car alone for seemed like an hour. I had no sense of time as a child. It was drugs. I was wondering who else has drug memories that only made sense later. I can honestly say my children have probably only seen someone smoking crack out a light bulb, tying off, or cooking on a spoon and lighter a few no times in their short lives. I saw one of those probably every day and thought nothing of it. It never even registered it as unusual or worthy of note. Early 90s NYC was something else. I hope you, and your family, are well and safe today. That's a very scary memory for a little child to have. We used to jump off our roof. First time hurt a little, but after a few times you learned how to land. Did it regularly and would try various items as parachutes to see if it slows you down any. I look at that height now and wonder how the hell we never broke anything. Kids' bones are more elastic, I guess. My mom did this as a kid. She was always getting into stuff she shouldn't have been, so ended up hurting herself quite badly a few times and trying to hide it. She was jumping off the roof with her cousins and using a towel as a parachute. Unfortunately, she got a little too close to the building and a nail end sticking out got her on the way down. I'm not sure how far into herself she ripped in the bum from memory, but this was in a time when you didn't go to the hospital for anything. Rural America. People who had grown up in the Depression with no jobs or affordable health care. Family reunions on my dad's side of the family always meant going to an isolated shack in the woods. The adults would all get wasted except for my mom and maybe one or two others. The dozen or so kids and teens were left unsupervised. I didn't care about that because I was too busy looking for bugs and playing pretend with the other kids. Also, I'm pretty sure a few of my cousins were hooking up with each other. I've shared this story before, but when I was around 10 years old I was sleeping over at my best friend Juan's house. We usually stayed up really late playing and would sleep in until like 11 or 12, which I loved because I rarely got to do that at my house. At about 8 AM his dad comes into the room and tells me to get dressed because he needed my help. His dad was a big drinker, so either his breath reeked of beer from last night or he had one for breakfast. Either way, he was a bit buzzed. He tells me he needs my help picking out a toy for one as a surprise and we were going to drive to Walmart. So we get in the car and drive down to the Walmart, which was like 10 minutes away from his house. It was a pretty awkward ride and he starts asking me questions to make small talk, like how I was like school and if I had a girlfriend yet. We get to the Walmart and he takes me to the toy section and asks me what I think one would like. I walk around and see Darth Vader's TIE Fighter. One and I were huge Star Wars fans and even went to go see Empire Strikes Back in theaters when it was re-released, so I knew he would like it. He buys the toy and then we have another awkward car ride back. He thanks me for helping and asks me to keep it a secret. I changed into my pajamas again and tried to go back to sleep, but about 10 minutes later his dad comes in and surprises him with the toy and gives me a wink. At the time I thought it was such a nice thing for his dad to do for him. But years later I found that the reason we went on this mission to get the toy was because he had been really drunk a couple of nights before and hit one. So he wanted to make it up to him. As far as I know, that was the only time that ever happened. But it gave a much darker light to what I thought was a wholesome moment. I thought this was going into a molestation direction. I used to babysit a lot when I was like 12-13. I babysat for a family once where the 2-year-old boy's room had a lock on the outside. They told me to lock him in there for half an hour if he misbehaved, which I never did. At the time it seemed a little strange, but woman shrugging. Obviously now as an adult it seems like a giant red flag. When I was looking to buy a house a while back, my then fiance and I found a house with locks on the outside of all the bedroom doors, and going inside those rooms we found scratch marks on every single door. We noped the duck out of that house so fast. I saw a moment her little daughter get shot in a nice neighborhood cafe across the street when I was shopping for shoes with my mom as a kid. I was old enough to know it was terrible, but it didn't quite sink in until much later. Ex-boyfriend shot them and then himself. I'd see kids riding on passengers' laps all the time. In my country, kids often stand in the back between the two front seats. I'm super paranoid about wearing a seatbelt, so seeing small children standing like that makes me absolutely sick. When I was in high school I got off the bus behind a kid I had known since middle school. We were walking to go inside when he just suddenly collapsed in front of me, smacked right into the pavement and started seizing. I knew something was bad wrong, but I thought he would end up being okay. He died in the hospital the next day because of bleeding in his brain. I knew when it happened that it was really ducked up that I saw that, but I never realized how disturbing it is until I got older. Now it really makes me upset. I have memories of him from middle school and he was just such a sweet and kind kid. He died freshman year and they had a moment of silence for him at our graduation. It was very sad. When I was 14 I went to my friend's neighbor's apartment because for some reason a 40-year-old woman wanted to be friends with us and her boyfriend came home and started viciously beating her kids in front of everyone and she just sat there talking like nothing was wrong, and at the time maybe I was too stunned or just too young to react, but if I saw that now I'd be terrified. I grew up in a northern town with a large homeless population and no homeless shelter. I thought it was perfectly normal to see a homeless person who froze to death on your walk to school in the morning. None of us would even bat an eyelid. In high school, it was extremely common for girls to be dating men in their 20s. So common I thought it was a healthy and normal thing. I even remember a couple girls having meltdowns because they weren't allowed to bring their dates to prom or other school events due to them being 21 or older. The ban was put in place to avoid the risk of booze being provided to minors. Now as a 26-year-old adult, if I found out my 16-year-old cousin was dating a man in his 20s I'd kill him. The man. Not my cousin. A grown-ass man has no business dating a child. Coraline. I never realized how creepy it was as a kid. A girl in my 5th grade class tried to commit suicide. While class was in session, I watched as I saw her fill her bag with a lot of heavy books, put her head up over her chair and put the book bag handle around her neck to choke herself. She was removed from class and I didn't see her for months afterwards. I am Mexican. In my childhood, I watched as children ate sweetbread, packaged yogurt or cookies for breakfast. As a child I thought how wonderful it was to have desserts for breakfast. To this day, I find it horrible to see how parents continue to feed their children junk food for breakfast or lunch. For something, child obesity is so high in my country. In the same vein, how much coffee I drank as a kid, at night anytime we visited Mexico. Had a jogger get hit by a car outside my house once when I was about 8 or 9. My nephew came running inside yelling at my parents and my sister to call the ambulance because he was bleeding pretty badly. I could even see him from our playroom's window and I wondered what he was doing lying on the grass. Turns out he was bleeding out pretty badly, deliriously yelling at my parents when they tried to help. Eventually, an ambulance came and picked him up, but my parents always told me he made it out okay. The day after, in the spot he was found, someone had put a lily in the grass in a vase. It took me longer than I care to admit to figure out he died from the hit and run. One time when I was around 7 or 8 I went to a daytime summer camp. There was a girl I was friends with and one day I decided to play a prank on her. She was sitting in a chair and I went up behind her, grabbed the back of the chair and shook it. She started laughing and yelling at me to stop. So I stopped. Then she acted surprised and asked why I'd stopped. Well, she specifically requested that. That's why. And then she said, no silly. My dad told me that when a girl says stop she means you have to do it harder. I meant shake it harder. I was swimming in the ocean with my friends and we found a plastic bag drifting in the sea. Because we didn't know where it came from, we decided to avoid it. 5 years later, I now know it was a jellyfish. Growing up, there was a super friendly late 20-something guy living in the house next door with his girlfriend, wife, and her parents. He used to always shoot hoops with me and my buddies in the neighborhood. My friends and I were all about 10-12 at the time. This guy was a Marine Corps veteran and one day he let us all check out and hold his arsenal of weapons. There were handguns, a rifle, some other kind of automatic weapon I don't remember now, and a grenade. I distinctly remember being surprised how heavy the handgun was. This was mid-90s. Breaking a bone. Back then, people who broke their bones would get so much attention, but now, I live in America, the bill for something like that is horrifying even with insurance. My mom had a RX-7 for our family of 4. We often rode on the deck lid behind the seats. She was so selfish and wonders why our relationship isn't stronger. Kids having kids is a bad deal. When I, woman, was like 8 or 9, I used to spend time with my GMA on weekends and she loved going to garage sales. I remember going to this one garage sale where my GMA bumped into someone she knew and they were chatting it up. She was distracted and not paying attention to me. The man holding the garage sale must have been in his 50s or so. He had a lot of hunting gear for sale, and I found a neat old duck whistle. I was playing around with it when the guy noticed and thought he would teach me how to use it. Apparently I wasn't blowing into it properly. He started explaining how to breathe and whatever and how to blow into it, but each time I did, he was like, no, you have it all wrong. So, to better teach me, he came around and stood behind me. He had his hands on my flanks and was explaining how to take a deep breath and exhale, blow into the whistle. He stood there, explaining this to me for several minutes, and each time I tried to use the duck whistle, I could feel him getting closer until he was almost like grinding on me. At the time as a kid, I just thought he had no sense of personal space. Now as an adult, I realize what a ducking creep he was. We did climbing in Pei, 6th to 8th grade, like rock climbing, and we had to do our own harness and stuff. Pei teacher, supposedly, checked it after we were done to make sure it was done right. One day my neighbor broke an arm and leg because she wasn't properly strapped and fell. This was at an international American school in Egypt around year 2000. For all those wondering what type of school does rock climbing, I was around 9 or 10 when I was walking down the sidewalk past a senior living high-rise. An old woman was laying on the ground reaching out trying to say something, but her speech was all slurred. I didn't understand and just thought she was laying in the grass mumbling and kept walking, but I mean she was clearly in need of medical attention. Happy tree friends. I did realize it was a horrifying thing as a kid, but far too late. My siblings and I had already watched a lot of it, and when I realized how awful the show was, I still watched it cause my siblings did. It literally scarred me though, and whenever I see it, I start crying. I'm Middle Eastern, and there's a tradition to show the utmost love and respect to your guest, and that is to literally kill a baby lamb in front of their eyes. I witnessed this maybe 4-5 times when I was a kid, and oh my, what the actual duck. No one cared that we were actual children being exposed to this kind of cruelty. I never wanted to see it again once I was a bit older. The number of times me and my friends had to poop or pee outside because my friend's grandma refused to take us to a bathroom when we were at parks or exercising her dogs in abandoned areas. Especially what went down at the Mormon church. Man, I remember growing up in South Florida, I definitely saw some crazy fist fights in school and felt bad for some kids who got ducked with and stood up for some, but if it got too crazy I definitely protect myself first. I definitely got desensitized to violence at a certain point, but now I'm older and see how absolutely brutal and ducked shit is today. It's no wonder people stay chilling inside having trust issues. You just never know what some people are willing to do, and it plays in your mind sometimes. Really makes you appreciate the shit you have while you have it, that's for sure. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.